Dave Hull was no stranger to treasure hunting. While he had yet to find anything of real value, it didn't stop him from exploring new terrain with a metal detector and his tools. And on one fateful day, as he walked through Maryborough Regional Park, he discovered something that would ultimately change his life. Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Big Rock. In 2015, Dave stumbled upon this strange-looking rock while going about his normal route. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew there was something strange about it, besides how surprisingly heavy it was. He had a hunch, but he didn't want to get his hopes up. Hull took what he thought was gold or home and got to work trying to break it apart. He tried everything he could, but the thing was incredibly sturdy. He even hit it with a sledgehammer, which failed to scratch its surface. Stumped, Hull stored the rock in his home for the next 4 years, planning on one day getting all the gold out of it. It wasn't until 2019 that he stuck it in his backpack and marched over to the Melbourne Museum. There, Hull met geologist Dermot Henry, the person responsible for testing samples that people bring into the museum. In particular, a large part of his role involves examining possible meteorites to test their authenticity. Of course, testing the specimens was really more of a formality than anything. Even after working at the museum for 37 years and testing thousands of samples, only 2 of those had ever turned out to be real meteorites. This is why, when Mr. Hull walked into his office and hoisted a large red rock out of his backpack, the scientist did a double take. This particular artifact was very promising, Henry thought. It had this sculpted, dimpled look to it, he remarked. That's formed when they come through the atmosphere. They are melting on the outside, and the atmosphere sculpts them. Could it really be true that this was the genuine thing? Upon lifting the rock, Henry was even more encouraged. It was way heavier than it should have been for a normal rock found on Earth, especially considering its size. Generally speaking, meteorites tend to be heavier due to dense deposits of iron and nickel found inside of them. All signs were pointing to Mr. Hull's discovery being something very special indeed. Lo and behold, when the tests were completed, both Henry and Hull were left in absolute amazement. The red rock was a meteorite, and even more fascinating, it was an impressive 4.6 billion years old, which carries serious implications. The geologist cut out a cross-section of the meteorite with a very powerful tool known as a diamond saw. What they beheld was more awe-inspiring than almost anything the scientist had seen in his years of working. The cross-section revealed beautiful silver droplets inside, but not just any droplets. These had been formed billions of years ago, crystallized from the cloud of incredibly hot gas that formed our solar system as we know it. The name of the meteorite, Mr. Hull would soon learn, was H5 chondrite. H5 chondrite had a highly interesting origin story, much more intriguing than any gold deposit could ever hope to be. 4.6 billion years ago, the universe was much different than it is today. It was comprised of tons of these same rocks, chondrite, orbiting around the sun. Looking at this meteorite was almost like looking at the origins of life itself. Eventually, these chunks of chondrite would cluster together, forming Earth as well as the other rocky planets. Luckily, some of the fascinating material was still left over. The majority of the remaining chondrite now sits in the belt between Jupiter and Mars. Every now and then, 2 pieces of it will collide, leading to a one-of-a-kind event. When this celestial collision happens, the impact sends shards of the otherworldly rock hurtling towards Earth. This is how the piece of chondrite that was eventually discovered by Mr. Hull began its journey. Due to the lack of weathering, it's likely that this specific piece had only been on Earth for less than 200 years. This makes it likely that someone had actually seen it fall. Sure enough, a look at local newspaper records from the time almost confirmed this theory, as residents of Maryborough in the 1950s report having seen balls of fire shooting across the night sky. And modern experts are curious if Dave Hull's find could be related to an extraterrestrial discovery in a nearby town. In September 1969, the village of Murchison in Victoria, Australia, was loud with talk about a mysterious meteorite flying through the sky. Of course, the space rock spoke for itself when it blared into the atmosphere with an otherworldly roar. After the meteorite collided with Earth, people spread far and wide to search for its remnants. The Murchison community combed the land, cooperatively and systematically, desperate to get a glimpse of some extraterrestrial crumbles. The residents found a multitude of spaceships, most of them being a charcoal gray color and exhibiting obvious indents as if made out of malleable clay. But there was one more feature that stood out to the rock foragers. For one reason or another, the rock smelled. And it was the kind of stench that you couldn't easily place where the smell came from, and it lingered. The rock fragments were described as smell like tar or methylated spirits, similar to denatured alcohol. It was all too odd. While some had to practically hold their breath, others were unbothered by the meteorite scent. Professors and scientists everywhere couldn't wait to get their noses near the stuff. Their snouts were practically itching. After David Deamer, a research professor of biomolecular engineering at the University of California, Santa Cruz, crushed up a marble-sized piece of the celestial rock. He wrote that he noticed a strange, penetrating odor rose from the mortar, simultaneously smoky, dusty, and sour. When meteorites make their way to Earth, they bring loads of information with them regarding star formation and other miscellaneous secrets of the universe. They're like alien carrier pigeons, but to get to the bulk of said information, researchers are often forced to burst meteorites open like piñatas. Scientists from the University of Chicago, the Field Museum, and other organizations that worked on the 2020 paper searched for Preseler grains, which are minerals older than our sun. Talk about ancient grains. By analyzing these pre-solar carbs, just kidding, the researchers can configure their approximate age. They crushed the space rock to access that valuable pre-solar silicon carbide and proceeded to pour the fine powder into test tubes. The tubes were transported between liquid nitrogen and hot water baths and bombarded with some really nasty acids, as Jenica Greer, a graduate student at the Field Museum and the University of Chicago, and a co-author of the study, put it. Their findings showed that some of the Preseler grains belonging to the Stinky Murchison meteorite dated back to between 5.5 and 7 billion years old. But after putting the rock through the freeze-thaw cycle, something changed. Jenica Greer recalls catching a whiff of rotten peanut butter, as if there was a decaying PB&J sandwich in the room. She suspected the rock's change in aroma occurred as it lost volatile compounds over time, later materializing when the grinding of the rock unveiled new surfaces. There are trapped gases and ices in the meteorite that evaporate and slowly diffuse out, Jenica said. We all know how smelly trapped gas can be. A piece of the Murchison meteorite that resides at the Murchison and District Historical Society no longer has its gag-inducing smell. Our sample has been exposed to air for too long. It now only has a vague earthy smell, said Kay Ball. The Murchison meteorite isn't the only pungent carbonaceous chondrite, as the researchers also got to sniff Oguazarcus, which was named after the Costa Rican town it crashed in circa 2019, nicknamed the Cosmic Mudball. This space rock was, too, made of organic compounds like amino acids. Though many said the Cosmic Mudball stank of cooked Brussels sprouts or compost, Jenica strangely picked up the smell of vanilla. You expected something more terry, but it has a sweet smell, she said. To clarify, these brainy scientists and researchers didn't set out to merely play scratch and sniff with meteorites, but their noses simply couldn't resist the opportunity. As Jenica Greer said, scientists are humans too. Sometimes our noses get the best of us.